Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Monday, the 28th of July. With Robert Murray McShane, we're reading through the book of Acts. Today we read chapter 15. The focus is on the first council in Jerusalem. Paul and Barnabas were in Cyprus in Antioch, ministering to a congregation which was probably largely Gentile. Some people came from Judea and said to everyone, in order to be Christian, you've got to be Jewish first. Kind of sensible thought, because Jesus was Jewish, all the apostles were Jewish. It came out of the Jewish tradition. The scriptures that they had were the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures. So it was not as far-fetched as it might sound today. Paul and Barnabas disagreed, and they went to Jerusalem to consult the elders there. They came and they presented their case, and some of the Pharisaic party presented their case. And then we have in verse 9, the apostles and elders met to consider this question. And so they discuss what's going on and what the right way forward is. And Peter stands up and talks about his experience with Cornelius. Paul shares what they've seen happen in the Gentile churches around the world. And finally, James stands up and says, it seems right that we don't impose Judaism on Gentiles. And the council agrees that that is the way forward. So here, one example of how you deal with disagreement and disputes in the church through discussion. You meet and you talk about it, and you try and discern what God's saying and what God's way forward is. Not an easy thing to do always, but well worth the effort that goes into it. And so they find the way forward. And the church, in a sense, hasn't looked back. But then, an interesting little aside, lest we think that the early church was perfect, a little later in the same chapter, Paul says to Barnabas, let's go and visit the churches we planted. Barnabas thinks it's a great idea. He wants to take John Mark with them. Now, John Mark had joined them on one of their missionary journeys and turned back along the way. And so Paul says he doesn't want to take John Mark. He's unreliable. Barnabas still wants to take him. Verse 39, they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, and Paul chose Silas and left. So there's such a sharp disagreement. They couldn't find a common mind, that they split up. And it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition of the first council in this situation. And as I was thinking about it, thought, I suppose the council was about theology. What is the truth of theology? Paul and Barnabas were arguing about personality and preferences. And that's a lot. There's often no right answer in that kind of situation. And sometimes where there is a sharp disagreement, maybe their route forward is the best, that you part company. Whether it was an amicable parting, whether they wished each other well, we're not told. We're just told they split up and went. And then just a little historical note. Later on, Paul, in one of his later letters, asks that Mark, the same John Mark, comes to see him and brings him some stuff. And he says, he's useful to me. So maybe there was a reconciliation later on. But always a challenge to us as Christians. When there's disagreement and dispute and dissension, how do we deal with it? Discussion's always the way forward. On theology, we've got to keep going till we find God's wisdom to stand on, which we've got in Scripture, whereas personality, a much more difficult thing to deal with. Be encouraged in our weakness and know that despite our weakness, we are blessed.